It was a quiet afternoon in the neighborhood, just another day, or so it seemed. Then, out of nowhere, a heated confrontation broke the calm. A young black man, Marcus, minding his own business, found himself the target of an escalating encounter with a police officer. What started as a routine stop quickly spiraled into something far more shocking. The officer, fueled by prejudice and power, made accusations that didn't add up. Voices rose, tensions flared, and then, in a moment that left witnesses in disbelief, the officer crossed the line. A slap, loud, deliberate, and dripping with disrespect, landed on Marcus's face. But what happened next wasn't what the officer expected. Marcus, calm but resolute, stood his ground. With unwavering strength, he refused to let this injustice define him. The tension in the air was electric. A crowd began to gather, phones recording, their faces a mix of fear and determination. Every moment felt like it carried the weight of history. What the officer thought would end in dominance took an unexpected turn that no one saw coming. Marcus wasn't just fighting back for himself, he was standing up for dignity, for respect, for everyone who's ever been silenced. Stay tuned to see how this encounter unfolds and witness a powerful reminder that strength and justice can come from the most unexpected places. As Marcus stood his ground, the officer's confidence seemed to waver for just a moment, but his demeanor remained rigid. The gathered crowd began murmuring among themselves, some in shock, others angry, but all with their eyes glued to the unfolding drama. Marcus, his face still stinging from the slap, refused to back down. His calm yet determined voice carried through the tension. "Why did you do that? I've done nothing wrong." This wasn't the first time Marcus had encountered unfair treatment, but this time felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone watching, everyone who'd been through something similar, and everyone too afraid to speak up. The officer, whose name badge read Stevens, avoided direct eye contact as he barked out commands. "Stand down, or you'll regret it," he snapped, but his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Stevens was used to people complying, backing away, but Marcus's steady presence wasn't something he'd anticipated. Meanwhile, those in the crowd began to pull out their phones, recording every second. Their eyes told a story too, a mixture of hope, fear, and a simmering frustration that had been building for far too long. Each passing second added more weight to the moment. Nobody knew what would happen next, but everyone could feel that something bigger was at stake. Marcus's heart raced, but his expression remained firm. He knew this wasn't just about him now. Eyes were everywhere, and each recording phone represented a chance for the truth to be seen. Yet, beneath the surface, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of the stories he'd heard his whole life. Stories about people who didn't make it home after encounters like this. But today he promised himself would not be one of those stories. Stevens, the officer, was visibly uneasy. The weight of the crowd's gaze and the ever-present cameras made him shift on his feet. He glanced at his patrol car, as if considering whether to call for backup or retreat. For a moment, his expression betrayed something unexpected, not just anger, but fear. This wasn't playing out the way he thought it would. Nearby, a woman in the crowd stepped forward cautiously, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Officer, we all saw what you did. He wasn't resisting. You didn't do anything." Her words rippled through the crowd, emboldening others. More voices joined in, some calling for justice, others begging for peace. Marcus could feel the energy around him shifting. People were no longer just watching, they were standing with him. The officer's hand moved toward his radio, but his hesitation was clear. The line between authority and accountability was being tested, and the tension only grew thicker with each passing second. The tension in the air was suffocating, every breath heavy with anticipation. Marcus could feel the crowd rallying behind him, their support silently pushing him forward. But he also knew this moment was fragile. One wrong move, one sharp word, and everything could spiral out of control. Officer Stevens, now visibly sweating, tightened his grip on his radio. His eyes darted between Marcus and the growing crowd. The weight of the situation seemed to bear down on him, as if he was realizing there was no way to undo what had already happened. Still, he kept his posture stiff, his hand hovering near his holster, a silent threat that made the crowd murmur anxiously. Then, a young boy's voice broke through the tension, clear and innocent. "Why is he being treated like that? He didn't do anything." The words hit harder than any argument, and for a brief second, everyone froze. The raw honesty from someone so young pierced through the chaos, shifting the focus back to the injustice unfolding in real time. Marcus took a deep breath and spoke again, his voice unwavering. "You've already hurt me once, officer. Don't make this worse for yourself." His calmness carried a quiet power, a reminder that strength didn't always have to shout. The crowd edged closer, phones held high, recording every second of this standoff. Stevens's hand trembled slightly, caught between fear and pride, as he made his next move, one that would decide how this all ended. As the standoff stretched into what felt like an eternity, the sound of another patrol car pulling up shattered the tense silence. The crowd parted slightly as two more officers stepped out, their expressions cautious as they took in the scene. Their presence sent a ripple of unease through the onlookers. Some worried things might escalate further, while others wondered if this was a chance for accountability. One of the newly arrived officers, an older man with a steady demeanor, walked towards Stevens. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Stevens stiffened, his jaw tightening as he struggled to explain. "The suspect was resisting," he muttered, though even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Marcus immediately countered, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I wasn't resisting. He slapped me for no reason." His words echoed through the crowd, drawing nods and shouts of agreement. The older officer's gaze shifted to Marcus, then to the phones recording every angle of the incident. "Is that true?" he asked Stevens, his tone sharper now. Before Stevens could answer, someone in the crowd stepped forward, a man holding a phone with the screen still recording. "We all saw what happened. It's on video. He assaulted this man." For the first time, panic flashed across Stevens's face. His composure cracked as he realized the evidence against him was undeniable. But instead of stepping back, he doubled down. "Everyone needs to disperse. Now," he barked, his voice desperate. The second officer, clearly unsettled by Stevens' behavior, hesitated. The balance of power was shifting right in front of everyone, and what would happen next felt like it could change everything. As Stevens' voice echoed through the tense air, the older officer stepped between him and Marcus, his hand raised to calm the situation. "That's enough," he said firmly, his eyes locked on Stevens. "You're not helping yourself." The crowd murmured in approval, but the tension didn't break. Stevens' face turned red with frustration, his authority unraveling in front of everyone. "This is my call," he snapped, but the older officer shook his head. "Not anymore." Turning to Marcus, the officer spoke directly. "Sir, I need you to remain calm. We're going to handle this properly." His tone was measured, almost apologetic, and Marcus nodded, his composure unshaken. Before anyone could react further, one of the bystanders stepped forward and handed the older officer their phone, the screen showing the video of Stevens' slap. The officer's expression darkened as he watched, his jaw tightening. He turned to Stevens. "You're done," he said quietly. But just as it seemed justice might prevail, Stevens reached for his radio, his hand trembling. "Back up now," he hissed, his voice cracking. Yet before he could say more, his radio crackled to life. "Stand down, Officer Stevens. We've received multiple complaints." It was the voice of his own department, monitoring the chaos through calls from witnesses. Stevens froze, his authority crumbling under the weight of accountability. The crowd erupted in cautious cheers as the older officer reached for Stevens' badge. "Hand it over," he said, his voice cold. Stevens, defeated, removed his badge, and handed it over with shaking hands. As he was led away, the older officer turned to Marcus and the crowd. "Thank you for staying peaceful. This will be investigated thoroughly." Marcus, still standing tall, looked out at the faces around him. He had won, not with violence, but with truth and resilience. As the scene began to settle, Marcus thought it was over, until a quiet voice behind him said, "This isn't the first time he's done this." A former officer, standing quietly in the crowd, stepped forward to reveal a story that would change everything. The crowd fell silent as the former officer stepped forward, his expression heavy with guilt. "I worked with Stevens," he admitted, his voice steady but filled with regret. "I've seen him cross the line before, but nobody ever stood up to him like this. Thank you for doing what I couldn't." His words hung in the air, a stark reminder of how much had been at stake. Marcus turned to him, his voice calm but firm. "It's not just about me. This can't keep happening. People like him need to be held accountable." The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones still recording, capturing not just the events, but the shift in attitude this moment represented. As Stevens was driven away in the back of a patrol car, the older officer approached Marcus again. "This isn't the end," he said. "There will be a full investigation, and I'll make sure the truth is heard." Marcus nodded, feeling both relief and the weight of what had just happened. The crowd slowly began to disperse, their faces a mix of hope and determination. Marcus stood there for a moment, taking it all in. He hadn't just stood up for himself, he had stood up for everyone who'd ever been silenced. Walking away, Marcus knew this was more than just one victory. It was a spark, a step towards something greater.